Mine went away again. I don't know. I had COVID.
Okay, it's 4 o'clock. We'll call this May 7th, 2024 meeting of the Salina Planning Commission to order. Daisy, can you confirm that we've met the Kansas Open Meetings Act posting requirements?
Yes, I can confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice was provided.
Thank you. Dean, roll call.
Going to go ahead and call roll. Commissioner Sydow.
Here.
Commissioner Van Covern.
Here.
Commissioner Alt.
Here.
Commissioner Farber.
Here.
Commissioner Paget. Commissioner Waters.
Here.
Chair Mike Sell.
Here.
We did have an indication that Commissioner Paget was going to try to join the meeting via Zoom, but Dustin is not finding her connected to the meeting. So we do have a quorum of 6 of our 8 members present, and we provided notice of today's meeting, so that allows us to move ahead with today's agenda, starting with approval of the minutes from your last meeting.
Hope you've all had a chance to look those over. Any corrections that we need to make, or do I hear a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Approve the minutes.
Second.
It was a tie. Okay. Moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the April 16th regular meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None being heard, motion carries. Dean, new business.
We have one public hearing item for you, which is a quasi-judicial land use matter, and it is a public hearing to be held on application Z24-2, and that's filed by Pastor Blaine Heron on behalf of the Emmanuel Foursquare Church. And the request is to change the zoning district classification of the church property from its current R1 single-family residential zoning classification to PC3, which is Planned Shopping Center District, and that is to allow the church property to have a wider range of potential uses and additional sign allowances than what's allowed under the current R1 zoning. And so the planned commercial district allows the Planning Commission and City Commission to limit the number and types of commercial businesses within a planned commercial district, and in this case, the additional use that's being requested is business and professional offices in addition to the already allowed churches and accessory child care centers and schools. And so the property we're talking about is on the north side of East Cloud, east of South Ohio Street, and the street address is 1325 East Cloud. And Mr. Hers is going to give you an overview of the application.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew. This property is the Emmanuel Church property, and they've had a number of applications that have come before this board and other boards. The property was originally platted and zoned in 1982. It was acquired by the church in 1985, and in 1990 they had 3 different conditional use permit hearings with the Planning Commission for their church building that exists there today. There was a rezoning application to go from the current R1 zoning to C3 in 2010, and most recently in 2020 there was a variance application for a sign to have the church be permitted to have a 150 square foot sign on the west side of their building. That was denied by the Board of Zoning Appeals. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, the brief history of the property in the background. As Mr. Andrew stated, the application that is subject for your review today is a rezoning request to go from R1, which is our single-family residential district, to a planned C3 district. And what that means is they're proposing a C3 district similar to what the Dillons and Meadow Point properties are zoned directly to the west, and I'll pull that up on the map. However, the zoning classification that they are requesting, because it has a planned element to it, would limit the uses of the proposed zoning to the existing uses that are allowed, which is basically the church and the accessory uses of the church, and business and professional offices. And it would also allow for a greater signage allocation because it would be subject to the C3 sign allocations versus the R1 sign allocations. So as we go through this rezoning request, we'll look at the different characteristics and elements that are reviewed. The first is the suitability of the site for development under the existing zoning. And this factor deals with whether the site is suitable for development under the existing R1 zoning, and also whether the current zoning inhibits its development. Under this topic, the applicant believes that the current R1 zoning inhibits the full use of the property compared to similarly situated properties by limiting the use of the building and also limiting the maximum size of their signs to 32 square feet. Staff would note that the vast majority of churches in Salina are residentially zoned in residentially zoned neighborhoods and are subject to all those same limitations, including the R1 32 square foot limitation on signage. We'd also note that there are 5 churches located along this south corridor of Ohio, all of which have the same limitations, including the 32 square foot sign. The question for the Planning Commission is whether you believe the existing R1 zoning and the conditional use permit is inhibiting the use of the property as a worship and educational facility, and whether this property should continue to be limited to residential and institutional use, or whether it is more suitable as a commercial use with commercial development. Staff would note that the approval of a rezoning request would move the commercial and residential zoning boundary in this neighborhood further to the east. And so what that means is currently the eastern boundary of the C3 zoning or commercial zoning is the west property line of the church. If the rezoning request were to be approved, the new boundary would be directly adjacent to the properties on Austin Circle. Now, looking at the character of the neighborhood, this factor deals with whether or not the proposed PC3 would be compatible with the zoning uses of nearby properties or to adversely affect the neighboring properties. So East Cloud Street is not a commercial corridor. It does have commercial properties on it, but all of those commercial properties are directly adjacent to Ohio Street, so if it doesn't extend beyond the properties that are adjacent to Ohio Street, and so this would be an extension furthering the commercial corridor east along that cloud corridor here. The primary motive for rezoning the application is again to allow the church to potentially convert to a business or professional office, or allow the church to have additional sign area as the residential district is more limiting. The real question for the Planning Commission is whether you believe that this 5-acre tract is a logical extension of the C3 zoned Meadow Point and Dillon's development, or if you believe that the residentially zoned buffer that it currently is should be maintained. In other words, is this property better suited as a buffering property between the commercial activities along Ohio and the residential properties further to the east, or is it most appropriate to be commercial itself? The public utilities and services, the site already has adequate sanitary sewer, water, gas, everything that it needs to function. There is a detention pond for stormwater drainage to the north of the building that's on this property that has a pump that directs water into the water sewer system under Ohio, and that pond is maintained by the church, and the pump within the pond is maintained by Dillon, so there's a cooperative relationship on the maintenance of the pond to the north. Streets and traffic. This area of Cloud, or the stretch of Cloud, is not improved to the full city standard. If you go out there today, you'll notice there isn't curb and gutter along the entire stretch. It doesn't meet the full city standard that we would typically require for commercial development along a roadway. However, the church use primarily has its heaviest use on Sunday mornings and a few times throughout the week when they have their major events, but it isn't a consistent heavy generator of traffic. And any type of business or professional office generally does not create a lot of traffic either. So from a streets and traffic access point, the proposed zoning change probably wouldn't have a major impact on the street system here. However, converting the property to commercial use could potentially have traffic patterns that change from the existing conditions. Conformance to the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan, I'll zoom in a little bit here because it's kind of hard to see on the screen, shows the commercial development that is along Ohio as part of a neighborhood center, and that is a commercial type of land use designation that would allow for commercial activities. The church property is currently designated as a suburban residential, which is primarily single-family homes, as well as civic or institutional uses, community centers, clubhouses, churches, schools, things of that nature. So as the property is currently used, the suburban residential land use classification is certainly appropriate. However, if the property were to be rezoned to PC3, the suburban residential land use category doesn't allow that as one of the zoning options, and therefore staff would recommend that if PC3 were to be viewed by the commission as the most appropriate zoning classification for the property, that the future land use map be amended to have the church property be part of the neighborhood center land use classification.
Dustin, do you have that zoomed out map that shows the whole extent of that neighborhood center? And
I
I
do.
think
I'll
that
pull
could
that
be
up.
helpful.
If I can get my, right there. So this is the zoomed out version. You can see it is a fairly extensive area. It's the Clouden, Ohio neighborhood district, but it stretches a pretty far distance, basically all the way from Belmont up to Cloud and all the properties that are along that commercial corridor. That brings us to site analysis. So one of the things that is a little bit different when you have a planned district is that not only are you considering the zoning of the property, but because there's a planned element, there's also a development plan that you would be reviewing and approving. And so we'll kind of go through that now. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because the church is not proposing any changes. So basically what we're going to do is just going to go over what the existing conditions are. The church itself is a little over 200 feet wide by about 89 feet deep. There is an addition that was constructed on the south side, which is the main entrance to the building, and it meets all setbacks and development standards for the C3 district. One of the elements of the property that doesn't conform to the C3 or PC3 district is when the church is being constructed, there was a bust in the surveying work, or at least understanding where the property line was. And in lieu of having a landscape buffer, they actually have the paving of the front yard area being 100% and then encroaching into the public right-of-way of East Cloud by 10 feet. So typically when we have a commercial development, what you'll have is you'll have the paved parking area, then you'll have some green space, a landscape buffer between the paved parking and the property line. I'll zoom in a little bit here so you can see it a little bit better. A green space between the parking lot and the property line. In this case, 100% of the front yard is paved, and the paving even encroached 10 feet or so into the public right-of-way. Staff has had conversations with the church on and off for the last several years to address potential options for resolving the problem. Option 1 is to remove the encroachment area, which would require redesigning and restriping the parking lot. Option 2 would be a vacation of a portion of East Cloud, meaning that the city would basically give a portion of East Cloud to the church so that all of the paving would be on their property. Given that there's utilities and other things within this right-of-way, that's probably not a viable option. And then the last option, or the third option, is what we call a license agreement, where there's an agreement with the church and the city through the city commission, the governing body, that lines out how the church can use the public property for the purposes of, in this case, parking, off-street parking, and lining out the maintenance requirements or whatever the elements are to that agreement. So that would be a third option that the church could work with staff on. But to this point in time, we haven't resolved the issue, but we did want to take note of it, that there is that issue that's hanging out there that staff and the church will need to work out at some point in time. Building design, the building is primarily brick, has a brick facade facing the south, east, and west sides. It does have a metal roof and metal siding on the north. The addition area where the main entrance is has a lot of brick as well as glass windows framed with aluminum, bronze mullions. And that's kind of the physical description of the exterior of the building and its design. Drainage, as I mentioned, there is a drainage pond that's existing on the north end of the property that is maintained by the church with a pump that is maintained by Dillon's. Front yard landscaping, the property is supposed to have 7,600 square feet of front yard landscaping. However, due to the surveying bust and the location of the parking lot, there isn't any green space in the front yard area to be landscaped, as 100% of it is paved. Signage, the current R1 district limits the property to 32 square foot signs, and currently they do have a wall sign above their main entrance. They also have a ground sign that is in this location here, basically the southwest corner of the property, so right near their entrance and exit at the southwest corner of the property. If the property were to be rezoned to C3 or PC3, then the allowable sign area would be 4 square feet per lineal foot of building frontage. And since there is 200 feet of building frontage east-west on this property, that would equate to 800 total square feet of allowable sign area. Staff would note that we did receive a call from a neighboring property owner who was concerned about the impact that the requested rezoning would have on the allowable sign area. That property owner believed that having additional sign area, especially if it's illuminated at night, could potentially erode some of the residential character of the neighborhood and make it more like Dillon's to the west there. So if you want to turn to your packets to page 17, we do have a number of action items. This, even though we have one item listed here, there's 3 different actions that take place with this. The first is going to be a determination of the appropriate future land use category. The second is going to be the zoning of the property, and the third is going to be the review of the applicant's development plan. And so for the first item, you'll need to consider whether or not you believe that the existing suburban residential classification is most appropriate for the property and the vision that the commission has for the property, or if you believe that the neighborhood center classification is more appropriate. And so I do have a number of options there starting on the bottom of page 17, where the commission could recommend that the comprehensive plan future land use map remain unchanged. That would retain the current suburban residential future land use designation of the church property. This action would effectively deny the applicant's rezoning request from R1 to PC3. That would be your first option. Your second option would be to recommend that the future land use map be amended to change the Emmanuel Church property from suburban residential to neighborhood center property. This would allow the commission to move forward with a potential consideration of the rezoning the property from R1 to PC3. And then number 3, you could postpone consideration of the item if you need additional information. So if the commission believes that the existing suburban residential land use designation is more suitable to the surrounding properties than the neighborhood center, then we would recommend that the status quo be maintained and that the property retain its suburban residential land use designation. However, if the Planning Commission believes that the neighborhood center future land use designation for the church property is more suitable, then we would recommend that the future land use map be amended for this property to reflect a neighborhood service or neighborhood center and future land use designation in lieu of the current suburban residential. And so with that, I think we'll take a pause and address this first action item before jumping into action items 2 and 3. And we'll take any questions that you might have. And even regarding the rezoning application or the site plan, as we'll be making actions on those shortly.
But you're not asking us to take action on this part of it without hearing from the applicant, right?
Correct. I think what we'll want to do is we'll want to talk about the proposed rezoning, any questions you might have of staff, any questions you have of the applicant, and then we'll break into the 3 different separate action items. If you want to talk about what your options are when you get to them before we talk to the applicant and stuff like that, we can do that, but we'll want to take each of these action items one by one just so that it's really clear to the City Commission what the Planning Commission decided.
And what our path was.
Yep.
Okay, questions of staff regarding what we've seen so far?
Yes. Dustin, what's the difference between suburban residential and then just residential?
So that's a future land use category, and I'll pull up a future land use map because I think that helps illustrate the situation. So give me a moment here.
The property to the north, which has the senior apartments on it and the other things, that is shown as urban residential as opposed to suburban residential. And so the distinction between suburban and urban is that urban is designed to accommodate higher living densities such as nursing homes, congregate living facilities, apartments. And so there are apartments to the north. You have the Parkwood Village townhomes along east of Ohio, north of Albert and in there. And so the future land use map shows those as urban residential because those are higher density, and the suburban residential is primarily any place in Salina that you have single-family homes and on reasonably large lots, you're going to see it as suburban residential. So the primary distinction is suburban means single-family, low density, and urban residential means higher residential densities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And for context spatially within the community, what you'll see on this map is this light yellow color is the suburban residential, which would match the church property right here. And the darker brown is the urban residential, and that's where you're going to have more higher density, 2-family, 3-family, multifamily kind of residential development.
Dustin, you said that the Cloud Street doesn't really meet the standards for city streets right now. What would that look like in the future if that was brought up to standards?
Sure. It would need to be widened to at least 24 feet along the entire length of the road, and I don't know if it is 24 feet now or not, but if it's not, it would need to be widened to the full 24-foot width. It would need to have curb and gutter on both sides. It would also need to have sidewalks on both sides.
Do we have any kind of idea that may be happening soon, or?
There was an effort made to create a benefit district for that at the time that the Dillon store went in. but it may not surprise the commission that residents of the Austin subdivision and some of those subdivisions who'd been in there for some time did not wish to participate in that benefit district, nor did Dillon's think it's fair that it had to build the entire street itself. And so we tried to create a benefit district where people on the north and south side would share in the cost of that upgrade. And in order to create a benefit district, you have to have at least 50% of the property owners in the benefiting area support the benefit district, and that did not occur. So the benefit district could not be formed, and the city has done some overlays, but they have not done a reconstruction of Cloud Street east of Ohio. And it's presently in the identified but unfunded category of the capital improvement program. So.
Thank you.
Dustin, you mentioned a letter of concern from a citizen. I don't see that in my packet. Is that?
It was a phone call conversation, so we don't have a letter. So what we do in those situations is we try to type that conversation in the report, which, let me see if I can find the page. I think it's the top of page 17 where you'll see information on that.
I did see that. I didn't.
Yeah.
I got you.
So we don't have written correspondence, but they did call in. And what happens is sometimes some people will see the sign. So when we do a rezoning,
Right.
when we have a rezoning application, we post a sign noting that the property is up for rezoning, and it has our phone number that they can call for inquiry or to talk to us about it. And that, in this case, that's what happened is the neighboring property saw the sign, called us, asked what was going on, and then expressed their concern about the potential rezoning, particularly potential signage.
Well, he also signed this, signed this.
Well, very well. But I'm just telling you that he called in with concerns.
Okay.
Dustin, do you have a way of pulling up the, like a street view of the landscaping at Dillon's?
I do. Give me a moment. I think I can figure that out.
I want to see the landscape of Dillon's.
I think staff would note that the site plan that we have in your packet is representative of the site development plan for the church property. It was prepared by an architect who worked with the church in 2009 on the front entry addition that was added on in 2009 to create a front vestibule.
So this would be the elevation drawing or street view elevation drawing of, or picture rather, of the landscaping at Dillon's. And what they did is when you construct a parking lot, you're required to have parking lot screening between and landscaping between the parking lot and the adjacent street. In this case, rather than having shrubs, which most commercial developments do, they had a 3-foot berm. So if you go out there, you'll note that there's kind of like a hill right next to the parking lot that helps to soften the aesthetic of the parking lot and the streetscape adjacent to the Dillon's. Here is the church parking lot, and so the encroachment is about 10 feet or so. So the property line, you can kind of see where the property line would be here. It's like virtually next to the sign, really close to the sign, coming in through like that would be the property line. So typically this would be green space here, and because of the measured bust, it isn't obviously.
And Dustin, in a PC action, we could put stipulations on it, like that a landscape buffer be put in place.
You could,
that type of
yes.
thing.
Yeah, and we probably want to before going down that road,
I understand.
because that would be a pretty dramatic change for the church and the parking lot configuration. We probably want to work with them on what can and can't be done in that regard, if that's the direction the planning commission wants to go. Here's another view of the front yard landscaping, just to get an idea of what it would typically look like. And here is Dylan's, and so the landscaping usually would be about right there. I'll zoom in a little bit more, maybe that helps. So,
Okay, thank you.
any other questions?
Staff. Okay, are we ready to hear from the applicant? Would the applicant care to address the commission on this? Your name and address for the record, please.
My name's Blaine Herron. I'm the senior pastor at Manual Foursquare Church here in Salina. And thank you for considering our application. I would assume that in your packet you received the petition and the map, correct? Of the adjacent properties?
Yes.
Okay, all right. The main purpose for this application is really to unlock the full potential of our property, which really broadens our potential streams of income. In the future, you know, we don't know what church life is going to look like, so it may be that we need to utilize our property and our facility a little bit better so that we can, you know, have some different streams of income. Also, the appreciation of the property as well. So rezoning would accomplish that, and a higher rate of return on rent and a greater attractiveness to potential renters. The demand for commercial property here in Salina is increasing because of growth, and so this would benefit the overall blueprint for our growing community. Also, if in the event we wanted to move and sell the property, it would be very attractive for potential future potential buyers as well. I don't have any plans on that right now, but in the future that could be a possibility. Also, the rezoning would afford us the ability to diversify the property as well. The application is not intrusive to the well-being of the neighborhood or the community. It's compatible with the surrounding properties with high-intensity commercial activity. The property does not cause, the proposed rezoning would not cause hurt or hardship to the existing properties that surround the church. It would not change the landscape of the corner unless we needed to do that frontage. The property, as you could tell from the map, is not isolated, which means it's not a the proposed is not a standalone property. It's connected to Dillon's, and so it makes it, I think, a little bit more attractive in that sense. I know Dustin talked about the future growth of the widening of Cloud, and I know that there was some talk about maybe a running path. And I don't know if you're well aware, but I'm in the office every day, and I see runners four abreast, you know, running from Kansas Wesleyan or the high school, and I actually run on Cloud as well to get to flood control. And so it only really makes sense that Cloud is going to really expand. And so the zoning wouldn't affect that whatsoever. There's a obvious barrier between our property and the residents, so it wouldn't cause hardship in that sense. Our proposal would not increase noise or a disturbance to the community as well. Our current use for our building benefits the community. So we're not just a church, but we're really a multi-purpose facility. Currently, there are veterans meetings that meet in our building, such as the honor flight that I don't charge, neighborhood meetings, neighborhood watch meetings held at our church. graduation parties, receptions, baby showers, funerals. Some of those things we charge for, but under hardship, we don't. I've never refused the use of our building to anybody or any group. When the building was constructed 30 years ago, it was the only structure in that area, so it was very visible from Ohio. So now that Dillon's came, we aren't really as visible as we once were 30 years ago. So the landscape has definitely changed. And so what I'm asking is that we would be able to grow with the change of Salina as well. We do have a partnership with Dillon's. We have a very good partnership. Assistant manager signed the petition as well. We also have currently happening even right now as we speak, the farmer's market. I charge just a very small minimal charge for vendors. As far as I know, I think right now it might be the only farmer's market that's in Salina perhaps. Dillon's did not have any angst about that, about us having a farmer's market there to compete with their products. We've always had a good relationship with them. Also, we are a state licensed kitchen facility. So we have served over 20 years at least 200,000 meals to the community free of charge. Last year, we gave away 33% of our income. So to not just here locally in Salina, but throughout our world missions projects as well. So when the church has benefited, it's always been the spirit of the church to give back to the community. So with the proposed rezoning, when we do well, Salina will benefit as well. We also have Haven Academy, that is a homeschool co-op that meets in our building during the school year that I do not charge. I let them have free rent and free utilities. We also sponsor Stewart School and Oakdale School. We give thousands of dollars back into the school system. And our impact in the community, our fingerprint in the community is very well known as a manual. We have not just benefited the citizens spiritually, but we've done that financially, and thousands of people, literally thousands of people, have been benefited from the ministry here. So the proposed zoning will only help and ensure that will continue and expand. Not one neighbor that I talked to, matter of fact, I went and did the petition twice because the heading on my first on the first petition wasn't worded correctly. So I had to go back to every single house and talk to every single neighbor again, and not one of them had a problem with this rezoning proposal. So in the application it says office, church, also Salina's growing need for daycare. We need a quality and safe and affordable daycare. This would afford us the possibility, the potential in the future to be able to do that. The fact that if you've driven by our facility in the last 6 years, you'll notice that we have improved the property considerably, not just with the drainage ditch in the back, but everything up front. It's really very tastefully done. Everything that we do there is very accommodating and very welcoming. And so this would not affect that whatsoever. My experience in Oklahoma, when I pastored there for 25 years, one of the first things that I did is I got rezoned from residential to commercial, and it was a dual zoning. And the pastor just talked to me 2 weeks ago, and he thanked me for doing that because of the things that they're able to do through the facility that they wouldn't have been able to do if it wasn't for me doing that 20 years ago. So this would afford future generations and future ministries to be able to expand in my absence or retirement. So, yeah, I think that's all I have. Did you want to ask me any questions or?
Sure.
And I do have some staff here that maybe, my facilities manager, I have a couple council members as well, so if you guys have any questions, they're here to help as well, so.
So tell me what, tell me what the development area would be to the north of where the church currently is. How would potential customers of that development area get there?
From where the drainage pond is?
So if they drive into your facility, they would have to drive either to the I'm guessing probably to the west of the church to get, and you're talking about building north of the church, is that correct?
No, we not building on whatsoever. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my question, whether you're going to have another separate building or you're just going to do the leasing or whatever out of the current
Yes.
building that you have. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, no proposed construction additions at this point. No.
I have another question on the signage. Do you really need to enlarge this? Is that part of your main?
That's a good question. Originally, we had 3 renditions of a sign that we were going to do, and it was during COVID, and there was the variance committee that my wife met with, and it was not accepted. There was a proposal to make that smaller. I can assure you that whatever we do will not be as big as is allowed, first of all, and it will be tasteful.
Well,
And one more thing, the proposed was to the west, and it did not face any houses whatsoever.
you have the potential, though, if we approve this, to have 800 square feet of signage. That's a lot.
Right, yeah. But if you look at the building, if you put it wouldn't look right. So it would be in proportion to the property.
But what we have to look at as a planning commission, if we approved it as such, you'd be able to do it. And then, you know.
I guess you'd have to take my word that it would look tasteful.
We have found over the years that those are kind of, words change and people change and positions change. And so we try to build decisions that are based on a longer term.
I don't know if it'd help you, but I am a pastor and I do what I say I'm going to do. So.
Not questioning that whatsoever.
That doesn't help at all.
Yeah, I know.
Mr. Aaron.
I probably shouldn't have
witness
said
there.
that. That's probably.
I think
not
one of
good.
the concerns may be that, as you mentioned, and you said it's not in the near plans, but if you did transfer ownership of this property, the following owners would also have the ability to open this up to that dimension of signage and so forth as well.
Right. You know, the sign allowances, if they're in the ordinance, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily go that big, but there's a reason why they're in there. It probably wouldn't look that bad anyway, if it was that big.
Dean, is there a way that we could, if we approve this, where we could limit the signage size?
You could have something that would be language that would say the maximum sign size of any individual sign is X square feet. And so one approach that is very common in Kansas and nationwide that Salina does not share is that most communities have a numerical limit on the number of signs, and the city of Salina doesn't have a numerical limit on the total number of signs, just on the sign square footage.
Well, as the applicant said, this could be sometimes sold to another owner who might divide the property up, and we could see a stacked, 80-foot tall, well, we can't do 80, but what, 50 foot?
But
I
that,
drove out there, I didn't
I
pay
mean,
attention. Which
we'll-
sign is it now?
We don't have one now,
Okay.
but that was the proposed.
Okay.
we would get into that as we look at your alternatives for taking action and possible conditions that you would place in any action. But I think the two things that are important, and we'll get to it when we discuss the options, and I've made it a point of emphasis in talking with Dustin and writing the report, and that is there's two possible avenues of approval. One is approving the ability to have business and professional offices as an accessory use to the church operation. And so if you make a recommendation along those lines, then you still have the church as the principal use, and the office space or the lease space is secondary to that. The other option is that you approve business and professional offices as a principal use along with or alternative to the church that would allow the church or someone to sell the property and make it 100% a business and professional office building. So you as commissioners would have to think through those two different alternate approaches. But if you opened it up for leasing and accessory use of business and professional office space, anybody who wanted to come in, purchase the property and convert it fully to a full range of commercial uses would have to have an application, notification of neighbors, and a public hearing to broaden the planned commercial district from what you're considering today. Because what's on your agenda is not to zone this to allow grocery stores and restaurants and things like that. You're considering church plus business and professional office use, and it's up to you to decide whether it's 100% conversion to office use you're fine with, or just opening it up to accessory business and professional office use.
I do have a question on our application. Did it include school and daycare because it was supposed to?
There has historically been a school in this building since its inception, and the schools are considered to be a legal accessory use to a church without any separate zoning approval, and if it's in conjunction or under the supervision of the church, you can have a daycare facility in a church if it is operated as part of the ministry of the church. Those are permitted accessory uses, and they don't require separate zoning approval.
I too run by there all the time, and I it's pretty treacherous running up Cloud Street when traffic's coming both directions. And my common run is to start at Bill Burke and run down the levee and go down Cloud and then up Ohio and back to Bill Burke. But and I cut right between you and Dillon's there, and I see kids playing at that playground that looks like a fun time. Mm-hmm. So that is part of the church right now?
Yes, sir.
And that's a school, or it's just daycare?
It's Haven Academy. It's like a homeschool co-op. And they've been growing, and they needed extra space. So they approached me about, maybe renting some space. And I just said, no, you can come, and we're not using our facility when you're going to meet. And it's a great, this is actually the second year that we've done that. And we intend to do it again next year as well, so.
So, Dean, I'm sorry I'm playing both of you guys in the middle. So if we approve this action, that would allow Foursquare Church to charge rent for the Haven School, is that correct?
Because right now, because I can remember as far back as 1988 when Manual Foursquare was in rented space on Duval. And they had a school as part of their church when they were renting space on Duval before they built this facility. And so when they moved and built this facility, there's been a school in it. The school that was in it eventually relocated over to Lowell School as Salina Christian Academy. But that school for a long time met in the Emmanuel Foursquare space. So the difference is today, and we have it in the memo that's attached at the very end. But we ran into a situation, it's a situation that we as city have followed and the county appraiser has followed. And what happened was there were a number of churches, they were renting space out to daycares, childcare centers that had no relationship or affiliation to the church. And the county appraiser said these are for-profit rentals of church facilities, and if you do that, that makes it a church use or a commercial use, not a church-affiliated use, and you will lose your not-for-profit tax status. So all those child care centers that were operating independently from the church and just renting space all got kicked out. And then we had to help them find more space because the churches did not want to lose their tax exemption. So what this would do is it would allow daycare centers, child care centers, and schools that have no affiliation with and are not operated by a manual to rent space in this building.
And that would, I take it, also affect their tax status?
It could potentially affect their property tax status, but that is not part of your
I understand.
your consideration, but
Are
it
you aware of
it
that?
could be a consequence of.
I had rental properties in our building in Oklahoma, several, and that was all cleared with the, with our EIN number through the federal government. And as long as we invested the money back into the ministry, it was never an issue.
We don't want to get into tax law or
Right.
anything like that here. We just want you to be aware that.
Right,
that
yeah. And even if this was approved, I'm still not going to charge them. So
What type of businesses would you anticipate leasing out to?
I'm thinking small offices, small office.
Like an accounting office or something like that?
Yep.
Okay.
different things like that. And like I said at the beginning of my presentation, you know, churches are in a really, I guess, challenging place these days, and we don't know what the future is going to hold. So, in forethought, it's really best to diversify. It really is, to be able to support what we're doing ministry-wise. And I did that in Oklahoma. I was very successful. I had many businesses that operated through the church. I had a probation office. I had a drug court. I had a crisis pregnancy center, and I could just go down the list of things that I did through that building that I would think may be coming this direction in the future.
Mr. Heron, you noted there is an obvious barrier between your church and the I think that's Austin Circle on the backside there.
Yeah.
Can we pull that up or see what kind of barrier? Is it just a privacy fence?
Yeah,
or-
it's a privacy fence, and then what we did was originally they had some really unsightly pine trees that got sap all over. Neighbors growing up in the power lines and getting sap all over, and so I took all those out and I planted nice red buds right along there, or flamethrower red buds that'll grow to look really nice. I think we planted 5 of them. So the only real as you can see, the only resident are those like 3 or 4 houses right there, and we have a really good relationship with those neighbors currently. So, matter of fact, one of them has a pool, and I let them park when they go to their swimming pool. I let their guests park in our parking lot. And then the easement, as you can see where those 2 vehicles are, I let the neighbors from Austin Circle, they can drive down the easement to do their work and mow back there, or any type of landscaping that, like bringing rock into their property. They just asked me, hey, can you guys move the vehicles so we can get down through there? I was like, yeah, no problem. So we have a really good relationship with the neighbors.
Regardless, you're not planning on putting signage on the was that east
side.
on the east
No.
side of that building? I
No.
wouldn't. You're trying to get visibility from Ohio Street.
From the west, that is not, there's not one house that sees it. And if you look at night, I showed you the pictures of the rendition. I had a commissioner come to me and said, I was at Dillon's the other day and I looked over there and I said, they need a sign. He told me that. And it's like, yeah, I know I need a sign, because when you look at it at nighttime, the cross is swallowed up from Dillon's. I mean, Dillon's is overpowering. Drive by there sometime at nighttime and look.
I do my shopping there at Dillon's, and there was concern about the size of the sign and lighting, but if you're concerned about lighting, I would think it would be from the parking lot there at Dillon's. There's lighting there that completely washes out your building from that west side, and I get it, trying to get some visibility out there. I wouldn't be concerned about the lumens and so forth due to the lighting that is already there in the Dillon's parking lot.
It's not intrusive whatsoever.
I just wanted to see that barrier on the backside. Thank you, guys, both of you.
Any further questions of the applicant?
Yeah, just to explain, the vestiges are also at the First Southern Baptist Church on South Ohio. But the screening rule is whoever goes in first has to screen. And so the church went in first. There were no houses. There was nothing to the east of the church when it was built. And the housing came in later. And all those property owners put up privacy fences at their rear property line, and that provides the screening. So the church is not obligated to provide any screening because the residents there have put up screening fences of their own.
I will add one more thing. If there is if Cloud were to be widened or whatever the process is for that, if we need to do something to the property, I'm more than open to look at all of those things, because we're always about bettering our property and making it aesthetic to the surroundings. So that's not an issue.
If we did put some kind of limitation on signage size, is that something you could live with?
I think so, yeah, because long range, I mean, yeah, ultimately a sign would be great. That's probably really secondary. At first it was primary, but then when I began to, reflect back on my career and the things that we've done in the past in those the facility that I had a 43,000 square foot building, so I saw the benefit of that and what it did to the community, and really it turned a bad community around because of the upgrades and the improvements that we did. So I'm all about that. That's what I really think is important.
Thank you.
So,
any further questions of the applicant? Thank you. Is there anyone from the public that would like to address this application?
We do not have anyone from the public on Zoom, so anyone from the public wanting to speak would be in the room.
Okay, thank you. Nobody? A lot of supporters here. Okay. I guess we'll bring it back to the commission for the first part of this action, which would be...
I think we should have Mr. Hirsch go through and summarize again the three different action items, and then there are parts within each of that. So your first decision point is whether this church is more tied to the neighborhood center associated with Ohio Street and Dillon's and Meadow Point, or the residential areas to the northeast or east. The second question is whether you think that planned commercial or planned C3 zoning with appropriate safeguards is an appropriate zoning for the property. And then the third part just deals with the site plan and whether there's any aspects of the site development that you think need to be addressed through conditions or anything. But under each of the recommendations, your first option is to essentially leave everything unchanged and don't change the comprehensive plan, which if you don't do that would not support the zoning change. Under the zoning action item, you could recommend approval of the requested change. You could recommend approval with the use of the property limited to business and professional offices in addition to the already allowed uses. And then you would have to decide whether business and professional offices should be allowed as a principal or as an accessory use. So what we've tried to explain at the bottom of page 18, if you say you think that business and professional offices should be allowed as a freestanding principal use, that would mean that in the future, if someone bought the property and converted the entire 19,000 square feet to office use, that would not require any reviews or approvals. You're saying that you're fine with that. If you say, well, it should be allowed, but only as an accessory use, then what you're saying is that the principal use of the property would have to remain as a church, with office use allowed as an accessory use within the building, along with daycare and schools. So that, of course, you could postpone consideration today if you feel like you need additional information from the applicant or staff, or you could recommend that the R1 zoning remain and the status quo say what it is. What we've outlined for you on page 19, Dustin, you want to go through your possible 4 conditions?
Yeah.
And that relates to, these would be, what would occur is if you recommend the change to Plan C3 zoning, then staff is going to prepare an ordinance that would change the zoning of this property, and contained within that ordinance would be any conditions or limitations that the Planning Commission feels comfortable with. And so we've taken a stab at a couple of those on page 19, so I'll let Dustin summarize those possible conditions.
Yeah, so the first condition is what Mr. Andrew was alluding to or talking about, and that the permitted uses for the property would be limited to business and professional offices as an added accessory use, in addition to already allow churches, chapels, temples, synagogues, cathedrals, shrines, and accessory childcare centers and schools. And in the alternative, the Planning Commission could recommend approval of business and professional offices as a permitted principal use. And so that's what Mr. Andrew was stating. So that would be the first condition. The second condition is that development of the property shall be subject to the C3 bulk regulations and development limitations. And number 3 is that signage for Emmanuel Church property shall be limited to 1 ground sign not to exceed 8 feet in height and 60 square feet in area, and no more than 4 wall signs. The total allowable wall sign area shall be subject to the C3 sign regulations. There were questions earlier about, well, can we limit the size of any one of those signs? And you could. So if you felt that you didn't want any wall sign to exceed 100 square feet or whatever your number is that you come up with, you could have that added to that condition. So the condition could read as it does, and then also limit wall signs to no more than 100 square feet or 150 square feet or 80 square feet, whatever it is you come up with there. And then condition number 4 is the applicant must submit a sign permit application for the existing wall sign that was erected without a sign permit. I didn't really get into it when I was doing my presentation, but there was a wall sign that was put up above the main entrance in 2011 that staff worked with the church at the time to construct, where it was 32 square feet. And since that point in time, a new sign has been swapped out and erected without a permit, so it has grown a little bit, and we don't have a sign permit for that. So that would be something we want to get caught up with the church on, make sure that they're caught up in that area as well.
I remember a long time ago we had an application from Foursquare for a big Tree of Life thing, and the debate was on whether the Tree of Life was part of the sign or if it was just artwork.
So I believe you were on the commission in 2010 when they proposed to rezone the property last time. And what happened in that situation is there was a sign above. Well, I got here. So the main entrance has a large architectural arch structure above it. And in 2010, they were proposing an Emmanuel sign with a large tree, and it was going to be 189 square feet. And and they came before the planning commission, they being the church, to rezone the property. The church unanimously recommended denial. It went to the city commission, and the city commission also believed that it was an inappropriate use of rezoning, and directed the church and staff to get together to work out another option. And so what staff worked with the church and their project designer, who I believe was Mr. Warren Edgar at the time, to have a 32 square foot Emmanuel sign, and then there was a tree then that was just a general graphic that wasn't really a sign per se. It was just a tree graphic that wasn't incorporated into the sign. Since that point in time, there was that sign has been changed out, and there's a large Eve that they have now, the new logo for Emmanuel Church that they have on their ground sign as well as the wall sign. We want to make sure that we got that permitted. So that's what condition number 4 is about. And staff recognizes that this might be kind of a tricky one, where it's hard to figure out exactly what direction you want to go. So we did provide findings in support of approval as well as in support of denial. And maybe before you go into your deliberation, we touch on those to see if there's any questions. So for possible findings in support of approval of the application, we have number 1, that based on the location and size of the Emmanuel Church property and its proximity to existing commercial development at the intersection of Cloud and Ohio, the Emmanuel Church site is suitable for limited commercial development and use. Number 2, the Emmanuel Church site is adjacent to existing C3 zoning, and limiting the addition of permitted C3 uses on the property to business and professional offices only would not adversely affect the surrounding neighborhood or nearby properties. Number 3, the Emmanuel Church property conforms to the C3 bulk regulations and development standards, except as to front yard parking and landscaping, and that's a result of the paving bust that we talked about in our report when the parking lot was constructed. Number 4, the public facilities and services are currently adequate in support the Emmanuel Church property and potential business and professional offices that may be added in the future. No expansion of the building is being proposed. Number 5, the Emmanuel Church property will be accessible from public streets and are adequate to carry the traffic that will be imposed upon them by Emmanuel Church property and potential business and professional offices that may be added in the future. And last, number 6, the Emmanuel Church property identifies more closely with the Ohio Street neighborhood center than the adjacent suburban residential area to the east and northeast, and a change to the future land use map is justified. So those would be the 6 potential findings that we would have for approval. Are there any questions or comments on that? All right, so then we also have potential findings for denial. And that is number 1, the Emmanuel Church has been established in this location for 32 years, since 1990, and the most suitable use of the site continues to be as a church allowed under the current R1 zoning than the commercial uses. The Emmanuel Church property does not meet the current C3 development standards as to front yard paving and landscaping. Number 2, the Emmanuel Church property is 900 feet from Ohio Street. The existing commercial zoning does not extend that far east on the south side of Cloud Street or anywhere east of Ohio Street. The requested PC3 zoning is not compatible with the surrounding residential properties to the east, northeast, and south. Number 3, the proposed PC3 zoning would eliminate the buffer between the Austin subdivision and C3 development to the west, and could damage the use, value, and enjoyment of the surrounding property in the neighborhood by allowing potential commercial uses to establish and operate on the Emmanuel Church property. Number 4, rezoning the Emmanuel Church property to even PC3 zoning, allowing business and professional offices as a permitted use, would facilitate requesting expanding C3 zoning in the future. Number 5, the potential of Cloud Street adjacent to Emmanuel Church property does not meet the full city street standard and is not designed to carry additional traffic should the Emmanuel Church property transition to a more commercial use compared to the existing church. Number 6, the requested C3 zoning is not consistent with the suburban residential land use designation in the comprehensive plan and would necessitate amending the future land use map in the comprehensive plan. So those would be the 6 potential findings you could have for denial. So we have a number of findings for approval and a number of findings for denial, depending on which direction you feel is most appropriate for this request. And so getting back to the action items, the first is dealing with the comprehensive plan. And on the bottom of page 17, we do have options for that. So just to reiterate what those are, the Planning Commission could recommend that the comprehensive plan future land use map remain unchanged and retain the current suburban residential future land use category that the church has. And this action would effectively deny the applicant's request to rezone the property from R1 to PC3. Option number 2 is you could recommend that the comprehensive plan future land use map be amended to change the future land use designation of the property from suburban residential to neighborhood center. This will allow you to move forward with potentially considering rezoning the property from R1 to PC3. And number 3, you could postpone consideration if you feel additional information is needed. So that would be your first action item.
Okay. Discuss the change from, or possible change of the comprehensive plan. Any thoughts, Commissioners?
So do you want to put that map back up, Dustin, and just show the boundary?
Sure.
So if we agree, if we want to do number 2 on action item 1, can we just make a motion to do that?
Do we need that as 3 separate motions then?
Well, what I think Commissioner Alt's referring to is that under action item 1, can the motion be to adopt alternative 2? And that could be made as
Right.
the
We
motion.
have to take that step before we go to any others.
Right.
Yeah, you really have to determine whether, if you see this part of the same development that the Meadow Point and Dillon's is more, basically you're saying this property is more associated with the Ohio property and development than it is with the neighborhoods to the east.
Correct.
And if you see it that way, then alternative number 2 carries that out, and basically it takes that neighborhood center and it moves it east and incorporates the church property into it.
Well, given that the church has a school acting there right now, I think the neighborhood center is a more viable option for that designation for the comprehensive plan than residential.
I concur. Just looking at the property, you would not consider that to be a residential property just by the looks of it. I concur.
Can I make a motion to that effect?
Certainly. Any other discussion, Commissioners? Go ahead.
I'd move we accept option 2 on action item 1, basically saying that this is more conducive to the current use than residential.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to adopt item number 2, which is recommending changing the comprehensive plan to the neighborhood center from its current suburban residential. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None being heard, motion carries. Okay, we'll go to discussion on action item number 2, the rezoning request.
So I think the main question here, you have indicated that you view this as part of a neighborhood center, not a residential area. And under alternative number 2, that can be broken down in one of 2 ways. One is to say the approach of letting space within the church be diversified and used for different purposes, but retaining the church use would be one approach. The other approach is to just say you're adding business and professional offices as a permitted use, recognizing that that approach would allow the building to be converted 100% to business and professional office use as part of your action.
And I get the tone from the applicant that we're looking at church as a principal use here and secondary accessory for offices, daycare, so forth. So I think that would be more in line with the application.
I got the same impression.
We're just pointing out that if you don't make that distinction, then it could be interpreted either way. And so if you're saying that you view the business and professional offices as accessory use within the church building, then that is the way that we'll carry out your intent.
So that's item 2, right?
Yeah, any further discussion on that? Okay. I'd entertain a motion at that point.
I'd move that we adopt item 2 under action item number 2, allowing the church to be the main type of operation there, but with the other types of businesses as outlined.
Can I hold you up for just 1 second? Commissioner Farber, did you have a question on that, or?
No, I was
Okay.
just, I was making sure I was following along with accessory and principal
okay.
here.
Okay, very good.
I think that was a good motion, Commissioner Alt, and I would be willing to second that as well.
So there's a motion and a second to approve action item number 2, subheading number 2, using the businesses as an accessory item and the church as the main item.
Just for the benefit of the record, we're going to assume that the maker of the motion likes the findings in support of approval that were attached to the staff report, so that you don't have to
Yes.
create any, if you want to say, based
Yes.
on the findings and
Yes.
support in the staff report.
Correct.
And then the conditions that are listed, are those also part of your motion? Or
Yes.
do you have any amendments to any of those to be added or deleted?
What about the sign size? Is that later, or is that on
No,
this?
that's this.
That's this one on page
yeah,
19.
That would be this motion. So if you have
Right here.
any feelings
Okay.
about that, that would be addressed. And condition number 3,
I guess I'd like to know, 800 square feet is huge. So what would be a reasonable 200 square feet?
In the example that he showed us in the papers that he brought up here, that was 770 square feet, and that would visible from Ohio. I mean, that's as far back as it is off of Ohio. It's going to have to be substantial to be able to see it.
I have just a little bit of a different opinion with that. I mean, if I would like everybody to be seen from wherever they want to see, and believe me, I'm in the sign business, I know this, but at some point, your geographical location is your geographical location. In other words, if you wanted to be seen from Ohio, maybe that would have been a better option. But right now, what we're dealing with is this. I don't find it necessary personally I'm not trying to influence the commissioner's opinions, but I'm not trying to influence personally the size of the sign. I think that 800 square feet is too much. But there again, I haven't seen a site plan for it, and I haven't seen,
32 square feet looks,
I know, 32 square feet's like a postage stamp.
Yeah.
Staff is slightly at a disadvantage here because we haven't seen any of the drawings that were shown to you.
Oh, could you
in
please
terms
show those to
of
the
sign
staff, please?
illustrations, so
they were presented during the first go-around in 2020, so you had them.
so are the elevation drawings that you showed the commission, were the elevation drawings that the Board of Zoning Appeals reviewed in 2020, is that what you're saying? Okay. So that was 150 square foot sign, if I remember correctly.
I don't have the square footage on it. All I have is the pictures.
Yeah, so that particular sign is 150 square feet, if that gives you context.
And
Okay.
I really wasn't prepared to talk about the sign too much today, so you'll have to, I apologize for that.
So option 3, or that we're discussing here for the signage, it's just saying to go along with current C3 regulations. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, C3 regulation and
We didn't have
Question.
anything specific that way in terms of the wall signs, because we don't have that much experience in limiting the individual signs. So the sign presented to the Board of Zoning Appeals in 2000 was 189 square feet.
189, okay.
And so that was proposed as a wall sign on the west side of the building. For a point of reference, the wall sign that the ARC has that is also zoned C3 is close to 200 square feet in sign area.
Okay.
And
And it is closer to Ohio, I understand that.
yes, but that, again, the C3 formula is based on your building frontage, and so because of the large amount of building frontage that the ARC has in Ohio, they're allowed to have X number of square feet per lineal foot of building frontage. And so if you think that the 189 square foot sign that was proposed is disproportional or too large, and you want to have a maximum size of any individual wall sign, then we would just have to be looking at to what the commission believes is reasonable and proportional. There's a couple signs that Dillon's has. Those signs are 125 square feet.
So if we made it, let's, I'm gonna throw an arbitrary number out there, 200 square feet, that would give size enough for a big sign for the west side of your building, and then also some smaller signage for your tenants who are possible tenants that might be inside. Is that-
What we proposed there is limiting the total number of wall signs to 4
Okay.
on the property. And if you wanted to, you have two choices. One, you can either say the maximum size of any individual sign is X, or you could say the total allowable wall sign area shall not exceed 200 square feet or 250 square feet or
For all wall signs?
For all wall signs. Right now, the number's 800 square feet.
Yeah.
That's 800 square feet for all wall signs.
So they-
Right.
they get
So if the way that it's written, you could have 4 wall signs, each of them 200 square feet in size, and that would be allowed. I think we might all think that that's disproportional to have 4 200 square foot signs, but that's what the formula allows, unless you come up with a limitation that you think is proportional.
Total 250.
I think we're getting into the weeds here a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, the
Yeah.
C3 is there for a reason. I say go with what's already there as that zoning.
Yeah, I'd
And
feel,
the larger sign's gonna be on the west side.
Of course.
I'd feel uncomfortable making a decision on square footage with not even knowing what it would look like.
Sure.
Yeah, and limiting them with that, so.
And with the rest of the zoning there in C3, there's a maximum allowable, and you can use up to, what did you have in there, 4 wall signs for that maximum
Yeah.
allowable. I don't think with any business or church or office, I don't think they're going to shoot themselves in the foot by making some ugly signage out there to take away from their presence.
So back to my motion, it would include the 4 items that the staff recommends on page 19 and the 6 items you outlined in the approval possibilities.
Those were the supporting.
Right.
Supporting findings.
So you don't want to make any changes to the,
No.
to the signage? Okay, is there a second to that?
I'll stay with a second on that.
Okay. I have a motion and a second to approve action item number 2 with the 4 staff recommendations on page 19. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None being heard, motion carries.
Well, as Mr. Hur, that would be approved as presented. As Mr. Hers pointed out, the thing that's unique about a plan district is that a site plan is approved as part of the zoning action, and your options on the site plan, which is basically approving the plan of existing conditions, is to approve the site plan subject to whatever conditions you believe are reasonable and appropriate, approve it subject to certain revisions being made to the plan, or recommending denial of the plan as submitted or postponing consideration to obtain additional information. I'm going to let Mr. Hers explain his recommended conditions and what that's designed to accomplish.
So we do have 2 potential conditions that would be tied to the approval of the development plan. And the first is the applicant shall submit a site survey from a licensed surveyor confirming the existing building setback dimensions. And the second is that the applicant shall submit a revised site plan of the parking lot that meets all of the dimensional requirements of the off-street parking regulations and keeps all of the off-street parking spaces on the Emmanuel Church property. In the alternative, the applicant can submit a license agreement application requesting that the encroaching row of parking spaces be permitted to be located within the Cloud Street right-of-way. And so the purpose for number 1 is that we have an updated, accurate current survey that would show not only the existing conditions and the relationship between the building improvements and paving improvements to the property lines, but would show the encroachment so that we could go to the planning or go to the city commission. And if the applicant chose to pursue a license agreement with the city commission, we would have accurate and current data showing that encroachment so they would know what they were making a decision on, and how much of an encroachment they would be licensing to the applicant if a license agreement were to be agreed to. And that would address the outstanding encroachment that's been there for since the construction of the parking lot in the original church.
I think it's time to get that resolved.
And we made no comments or recommendations about front yard landscaping because there simply isn't any place to put it. It would have to be in the right-of-way if there was any.
So if we want to allow them to keep that parking where it is on the south side, this would apply. In the alternative, the applicant can submit a licensed.
You could recommend that they submit a license agreement requesting that the encroaching row of spaces be permitted to stay as they are.
Okay.
I don't know if you recall, earlier this year, you had a rezoning case at Mulberry and Santa Fe. And as part of the plan that they submitted for that rezoning, the proposed restaurant that was going to go there had an outdoor seating area that required parking to be bumped out, and some of the spaces that were on private property today would have to be bumped out into the Mulberry Street right-of-way. You recommended approval of that, but then when it went to the City Commission, they approved a license agreement that allowed the parking stalls along Mulberry to encroach out into the Mulberry right-of-way as long as they relocated the sidewalk. And so the license agreement and the control of the right-of-way doesn't belong to the Planning Commission, but if your recommendation is that the parking spaces should be allowed to remain as they are, then that you're saying that they don't need to revise the plan to keep all the parking on their own property. So
Everybody understand that one?
Really?
So it's not worded. Probably should have been a third or a different alternative. But under condition number 2, there's two paths. One is we think they shouldn't have their parking on City Cloud Street right away, and they need to relocate it. Or you're saying that we think it should be allowed to stay where it is, and the applicant can submit a license agreement application. So if you think it should be allowed to stay where it is, you should say so.
I have one quick follow-up question with the applicant. What's it look like there in the parking lot on Sundays? Are you packed? Okay.
Yes, we have 3 services, and the second one on Sunday is full pack.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Herring, if I could follow up, did you hear the conditions that they were discussing for this of getting a site survey and then submitting a license agreement, I guess? Are you okay with that, or?
What would that entail? I mean, I know the site plan will cost, I realize that, but the application, I'm sure, will
That would be a question
be
for.
a small fee probably for that.
I'll leave that to them.
Yeah.
But it's, obviously there would be cost involved with removing those parking spaces
Right.
for right-of-way, but,
And
I-
the licensing agreement would take that burden away.
and that would go before the city commission, I'm assuming.
That would give you license to use that strip of
I did have
asphalt.
I did have a thought, in the event that, there is construction on Cloud, which is probably going to happen eventually. I mean, that's when, that would be a good time to do all that at the same time.
Well, we're not saying that you have to do anything with it right
Oh,
now. I
okay.
think if I read the commission right, that we would want to direct you to obtain a license agreement to use that legally,
Okay, thank
the
you.
way it is
Yeah,
right
we
now.
didn't word that very artfully, but what we're saying is that as a commission, you could say, we're only comfortable, we think the site plan should be revised to keep everything on the church property, or you're saying you're comfortable with how it is today and directing us to work with them on a license agreement. And as to,
So
I don't think that condition number 1 needs to be a separate condition. I think we can take that out, and I think we can simplify it by saying you can recommend approval of their site plan as is, with the parking as is. That can be a motion.
So moved.
Second.
And that is with directing the applicant to obtain a license
Yep.
agreement for
Right.
it. Okay. So that's the motion, and Greg
Second.
seconded that.
Aye.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? None being heard, motion carries.
Okay, this is a recommendation from this body, and it will go before the Salina City Commission on June 3rd. The City Commission, because they're meeting twice a month, they don't have a meeting on Memorial Day, so they're going to have 3 meetings in June, the 3rd, the 10th, and the 24th. So this will go to the City Commission on Monday, June the 3rd.
Good. Okay. Administrative items.
Don't have any administrative items or any preliminary discussion items for you today that we're aware of. There's a groundbreaking tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock for the Dry Creek Edition apartments that were proposed out west of Menards. And so you reviewed the zoning annexation and plat for that property, and that is coming about. And there still seems to be a lot of pending activity out there. We will meet on Tuesday, May the 21st, because we have an application to develop if you're familiar where the Ashby Furniture Warehouses, or Ashley Furniture Warehouses at Yost Drive and Waterwell. There's a proposal to develop the property on the east side of Yost Drive at that location, and that will come before you at your next meeting on the 21st.
Very good. Any unfinished business, Dean?
Nope, I can't think of any follow-up items. The city commission concurred with the follow-up recommendation on 2018 South 9th, and so that application was approved. Sign permits have been issued, and I think they have moved into the property. So,
Very good. Public forum. Anybody like to talk? Now's your chance. Be on TV. Dustin, do we have anyone online?
We do not have anyone from the public online.
All right. Well, I'd take a motion to adjourn then.
I've made enough.
All right,
I
somebody
move
else.
we adjourn.
And a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Very good. We are adjourned.